Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, to our online guests and to our guests in the arms. There we are, I remember what I said. This evening we welcome Justin O'Connor, who is now Assistant Director of Assets at Broadland. This presentation tonight is about, as you can see, the plan to achieve decarbonisation, and a lot of people are hearing about this subject all over the place. Justin is becoming, should we say expert? Just to build this part up. I thought you'd enjoy that. We'll see where we go with that. But this is a major part of strategy in the future, and as you can imagine, a major part of probably energy in the future, the way buildings operate in the future, and also financially how much it's going to cost in the future. And some say the future is actually here now. So you know, so that it's an interesting subject. So Justin. Brilliant. It's all yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew.
It's an pleasure.
Thank you for that introduction. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm the expert on decarbonisation, but what I would say is an area that I'm really passionate about. And I'd just like to thank everybody for attending this session today, because it tells me that there's people out there who also care about the environment, care about decarbonisation and what Broadland Housing are doing in our journey. So to start off, I'm just going to go through some really basic thoughts in terms of how we got to the position we're in at the moment. Then I'm going to talk about more about Broadland Housing and where we're at as an organisation in terms of the energy performance of our homes. And then I'm going to move on to future aspirations and our journey in terms of where we want to be moving forward. Feel free, by the way, to ask any questions that you would like during the presentation, and if someone could let me know if you see a hand up in the background on the screen.
I think Louise is going to track it for us.
Then I will pause as well. And okay, so hopefully, just to start with, there was a question earlier on in regards to what is decarbonisation. Hopefully you're more familiar with global warming and the impact that fossil fuels and emissions are having on the environment. So in simple terms, greenhouse gases, the burning of fossil fuels, and that creating an atmosphere, a barrier, and therefore heating up the environment and causing freak weather, I would like to say. I was interested because I was looking earlier and I was wondering in 2022, how did that compare to previous years in regards to average temperatures? And I think it was the 6th hottest temperature on record in 2022.
For the globe?
For the UK. For the UK specifically. 6th hottest. But there were reports also is that we had some of the hottest temperatures throughout the year on 22. But in average, I think it was the 6th hottest. But the scary thing is, and I haven't got a graph to show it, if you was to see the trend of global warming across the globe, it is scary. It's frightening in terms of the increase in the average temperatures. And it gets quite tricky because there's so many different phrases or terminology. Crick and floorboards, this came about earlier on. Must stay in the same position, otherwise you won't be able to hear him speak. But there's so many different phrases and terminology that is used. And the buzzword at the moment is decarbonisation, but you can see there are many different words that you will hear or come across in that journey towards decarbonisation. In terms of history, some of the legal drives and the reasons why we're doing this, if you don't just care about the environment, the United Nations Framework Convention commenced in 1994, so this goes back that far. And then a group was set up called the Conference of Parties. The most recent one, some of you will have seen on the news, and that was in Egypt. I don't know if any of you saw that on the news at all. Yeah, and it was interesting because every time there's one of these events, the noises that come out is that we need to do more. We must do more. We're not doing enough. But interestingly, COP27 in Egypt is that there are some countries actually who are using fossil fuels more so to achieve their decarbonisation journey. So unfortunately, not all countries agree in terms of how we're going to get there, But I think universally now, the majority of countries are signed up and say, actually, this is an issue. And you've only got to look at the news and some of the catastrophes in regards to the weather and the impact that it's having around the globe, that it is a real serious issue. Sorry, James?
Many of the fringe meetings at COP27 were talking about carbon capture and storing what is captured in sort of the bowels of the sea, North Sea, the Atlantic, Pacific. One group were talking about carbon capture as a part and parcel of anybody who is developing and drilling or mining fossil fuels, that they have to balance what they take out as a fossil fuel and provide the carbon capture that matches that.
Yeah.
That will help those countries who are still classed as third world countries who don't have the means.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting because the other point, which I'll come on to later on to my presentation, is that the technological advances also is playing a big and vital role and helping to support countries in terms of achieving our aims. So in the UK, we are mainly governed by the Climate Change Act 2008. And again, I will come on to various legislations which link and feed into the Climate Change Act. Okay, so in terms of the sector or the environment that we work within, this is more of a contextual background in terms of the targets that are there and set in place already. So we are looking at new buildings being zero carbon ready, and you can see the timeframes on these are quite short. New boilers being installed being hydrogen ready from 2025, and I would imagine on some of these targets things will change year on year. Some things will be pushed forward, some things will be pushed back, dependent, because there's lots of dependencies that relate to some of these targets. District heat connections are low carbon from 2025. So there's also consideration that we need to be mindful of, especially when it comes to new development, to make sure that we are ready so that we're not stripping out and doing the same thing again mid-term. In terms of our rented properties, so for our existing homes, to be certified EPC or better by 2028. Now that date has since moved, it's widely accepted, it's moved to 2030. So again, another example of things slipping. It wouldn't surprise me if that 2030 date for existing homes changes again in time. And we'll go on to some of the reasons why on a later slide. The phasing out of oil and coal, so the phasing out of natural fossil fuels. No natural gas boilers on new build or replacement boilers by 2033. Again, that will be an interesting one to watch because gas is very popular. It's a very, I wouldn't say cheap because I don't think any form of energy is cheap at the moment, but it's one of the lowest cost providers of heating in the country at the moment as it stands. And for heat networks to convert low carbon heat sources from 2040. So this is some of the key drivers in terms of what we are required to look out for as a sector and Broadland as an organisation. Question.
What does zero carbon ready actually mean by 2025 for new builds? You can come back to me and we can look at it afterwards. I didn't know if you knew, sorry. Top left picture.
All new buildings zero carbon ready from 2025.
I don't know if you know what that meant.
I personally, I think it's about making sure your frame systems are right and you've got the infrastructures to be able to put in low carbon heating systems. Is the adaptability of it. That's what they're trying to say in that. What it actually looks like, as you and I know, Phil, is a completely different story probably, but that in essence is what it is. So it's making sure the frame of your building is okay and it's adaptable to take other systems in the future. So that's what it means.
Justin, before you go on, is air source pumps, the one on the end. I've heard recently that they're very expensive and they don't actually work very well. Is that true?
Good question. We're going to come on to that. We are going to come on to heat pumps.
Slide on its own.
We are going to come on to heat pumps because there are some myths
Yeah.
about heat pumps.
Because you're putting them in your new houses, aren't you?
Well, heat pumps are not a new technology
No.
now. Heat pumps are being installed. They've been around for
Since the 90s.
yeah. They're not that newer technology, but we are learning a lot more about heat pumps since a bigger demand for heat pumps probably from last 10 to 15 years. There was a surge in those heat pump installations, but cost is an issue. But we'll come on to that on the next slide.
But yes, they are going into new build now.
They are
Going into all our new build homes now.
I
I think
thought that was what's
the
happening.
key word in this discussion is mindset.
Yeah.
How we change that.
Yeah. So in terms of focus and where we are at the moment, we are looking at, we don't currently have, we have a sustainability policy. What we're working on is a new decarbonisation policy, a sustainability policy that is split into 3 key areas. So we are looking at new homes, so new build homes. So the question that you asked earlier in regards to what does zero carbon ready, there will be lots of literature, lots and lots of literature in terms of what that actually means. Things will change. But when we look at new build homes, we're also looking at, and what's highlighted there is the embodied energy of these homes. So it's not just about the certificate or the energy rating of the home once it's built, but it's about the carbon and the energy used actually to build those homes. So the materials that we use, the transports and the activities to build those homes. Because it's great saying, excellent, this home is this rating, but actually how much carbon was used to actually build that home. So that's one element. Second element is the existing homes. So what are we doing actually now with the houses that already exist? What energy performance measures can be used to improve them? And that's a journey. That's not just about installation measures, but it's also about the people who live in those homes understanding the technologies and what we're trying to achieve. So it's a journey between both parties in terms of hoping that we can improve the efficiency of the homes. And the third area of focus is our operational activities. So what that relates to is our services that we provide, for example, reducing our mileage where we can, vehicle uses, and other things that we can do and do with our partners. So we procure a lot of services that we don't necessarily deliver ourselves. What can we do to influence those decisions as well? So we have more of an influence on other organisations that we work with to help to achieve the same objectives. Okay, so more specifically in regards to our existing homes and also some of the accreditations that we currently have. So we have a Shift a Gold Award in 2021, and we also have our Ritterwald Certified Sustainable Housing Award. What you can see on the right hand side there is the energy rating of our homes, which runs from A to G, and then the total amount of homes that we own and how many homes we have at each of those energy ratings. And this was last updated this morning, so it's changed slightly from the last time it was reported. And generally, I would say that's a good position to be in. Obviously, it could be improved, but it's not a bad position to be in. And I refer to the earlier slide that said we were looking to get the 596 and the 18. Anybody who's good at maths can tell me what that totals. Push them up into the C band. That's the first priority for Broadland Housing to achieve that by 2030. And it's not an easy task to do, not an easy task to do. And the later target, which I'll come on to later, is to then push the C's up into the B band. So what are the core principles? What are we trying to achieve? So primarily it's about education. So it's about understanding, so it's about staff, it's about residents, it's about understanding the impacts of global warming and what we can do collectively. They are not just technical solutions. It's not just about slapping things onto buildings to make them perform better, putting in new technologies. There must be an understanding in the reasons why we're doing this, and also the end users understanding and wanting to be able to achieve and reduce carbon emissions also. The second photograph there is of a house, and the challenges that we have also is that the measures that we install, and there are certainly standards now that will take you down the journey of making sure that you install the correct standards or the correct measures to the correct standards to make sure you're making the most benefit of any energy enhancements to the home. So the photograph there, as an example, the most amount of heat is lost out of the walls of the fabric of the building. So the fabric is really important, but it would make no sense in this instance to start off to install, I don't know, a renewable heating technology like air source heat pumps, whereby the majority of the energy in the house is being lost through the fabric of the building. So in most instances, when we're talking about retrofit measures, we're talking about a fabric first approach, which is making sure that any heat that you generate within the home is retained within the home. And that gives you some examples in terms of windows, 10% loss, the roof 25% loft, which was relate to loft insulation, and the 15% through ground floor insulation. So it's really important that we understand for the measures that we want to install, external wall insulation. The majority of our homes already have wall insulation, fortunately. But Joe will tell you from the orchards that there are some buildings which are more difficult to treat because of their location, because they're in a conservation area, because they're a listed building, for example, makes it a lot more difficult to achieve that type of solution. And the third core principle is making sure that actually we're able to have processes in place and be able to understand what that journey looks like. There's lots and lots and lots of data that we have to capture to understand the energy of performance of our buildings. There's even more data that's coming in. There's lots of conversations about energy performance certificates. And is that the best tool to understand and measure buildings? You will see on an energy performance certificate that there's a page also that gives average costings about how much that and how accurate that is. It's going to be very variable depending on who lives in the home and how they use that home, and they will have different patterns. So for people picking up an energy performance certificate and saying, well, actually, my average cost is a lot higher than you've got on the certificate, it's quite broad because it's not just about the performance of the home, it's also about how much energy you use and the lifestyle within the home. So there's been a lot of debate in regards to energy performance certificates and are they the right measure for energy performance. Okay, so some of the key issues. Key issue number one, big challenge is the financial commitment to be able to deliver this. And I've given 3 presentations in the last 12 months, and I would say that things have moved considerably since my first presentation and my second presentation. And it is a big challenge. And realistically, we need funding to support us. And we also need to be in an environment which allows us to be able to focus and generate the funds needed to deliver our commitments again to achieve what we'd like to in 2030. So inflation is a big problem. If I was to say to you that we did an external wall insulation job on a semi-detached house for around £10,000, and I'll have been at Broadland for 5 years next month. So it's probably around 3 years ago, it cost £10,000 for external wall insulation. The average quotes that we're getting at the moment are £30,000. Air source heat pumps, we were installing air source heat pumps at around £6,000. This was before I moved to Broadland, I must say, but £6,000 was the average cost, and it was fully funded. In those what I would call the good old days, fully funded, quite simple to get the funding for. And air source heat pumps now, you're talking somewhere between 11,500 13,000 pounds, and you will not get full funding for an air source heat pump. So these are some of the challenges that we're having in terms of forecasting. This is what we want to do, and this is the timescale we want to do it in. But the environment that we work within, things are changing, and it's putting pressures in terms of what we actually can deliver.
Can I ask a question? Have you actually carried out a budgetary forecast?
We have carried out a budgetary forecast.
Would you like to disclose that?
I know the budgetary forecast, and it's not this now. It has increased, but the previous forecast, I believe, was £40 million worth of
Somewhere between 40 and 50 million to
No, that was
to get to net carbon zero.
I talked about that figure at the end of the last session of the TAG. So that was what, a year ago? Yeah,
At least.
over a year ago.
Yeah. So it will have increased.
Yeah.
Since. The other challenge that we have is we know that everybody's suffering with this problem, and that is fuel poverty, or the ability to heat your homes, impacting on everyone, and it's causing huge problems within the sector. There are more challenges we know, and there was a stat on the radio coming into work today. Something like those on prepayment meters were not able to top up their prepayment meter, and they were talking about 3 million people they were aware that happened to over the last 12 months. So it is a big challenge. It has impacts in terms of the home, and there's a big issue in regards to damp and mold at the moment as well, and not being able to heat your home only exacerbates some of those problems. And it's really sad, and who knows what's going to happen. There's talk at the moment that energy costs have come down, but I think it's such a volatile market at the moment, we just don't know which way that's going to go. But it is a real concern because people are really struggling with affordability. Regulations changing all the time, and laws and so forth. So you saw the legislation that we had previously. Even the energy performance certificate and the way that's measured, they're already talking about upgrading that, so they will be looking at different ways to manage energy performance certificates. The challenge that we have with that, and I think it's right to upgrade your assessments, but what that means is when they assess homes in, say, 5 years' time, the likelihood is that the standards will have been improved, and therefore there will still be additional works to do to our homes to prevent a C rated energy performance certificate going to a D, or a B from going to a C. So the standards are always increasing, which is the right thing to do, but we have to bear in mind in terms of the context is we're still trying to get to our original standards of today, but things change over time. Technology, there's something another story. There was something I heard on the radio just recently in regards to Cambridge University, or Cambridge Science Park. Have invested a lot of money. It was really exciting because they've advanced a new technology that they think is going to be absolutely a big thing of the future in terms of generating electricity. When it will arrive, I don't know. Whether it will all work, I don't know. But with technology, with hydrogen, with new technologies, will it work? Won't it work? How much is it going to cost? It's all a question mark, and I guess it's a question in terms of risk appetite. If you like it, when is your chance to jump onto that bandwagon? And there is an element of risk to that. But with all of these new technologies, and we'll come on to air source heat pumps next, but with all these new technologies, there is a level of risk associated with that. And then the final one, there is a picture of the air source heat pump, and that relates to the skills that are also required for an air source heat pump. So at the moment, we've got a lot of urban boilers. I think we've got over 3,000 properties that have gas boilers in. Boiler has a fault, we send the gas engineer, they go out, they fix the problem. Air source heat pump, fault is called in. Do you need an electrician? Do you need a plumber? Do you need the air source heat pump specialist? And what that's about is actually having the staff and then having transferable skills and training up our staff to be able to work on the various different and new technologies. And again, a lot of people have been trained up a specific way for a specific trade over a long period of time. Sometimes that's not that easy to do. So there is a lot that we need to think about, as with the sector, and it's a wider and broader challenge than just in Broadland, is having the people with the right skills to be able to work on the new technologies.
Hiya. I was just inquiring, what does the solar panels, we've got solar panels on our houses, and wind farms, they produce electricity, obviously. So where does that come into all this? Could houses have their own wind farm, you know, to support their electricity? I've got solar panels, and to this day I don't know what they do.
Okay, good question. Good question. So you're right.
No.
So
No, they said that they were going to save us money, but it doesn't seem to be doing that. But you're talking about sustainability. I mean, wind farms and solar panels, surely.
okay.
You know.
So yeah, absolutely. So generating electricity is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant because it's going to help to reduce your bills.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's using a renewable source of energy to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So in terms of solar panels, there are two types of solar panels. There's something called solar thermal,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to provide you with more hot water. Not a big fan of solar thermal because they take a lot to maintain, and you don't necessarily use a lot of hot water
No.
in the home. So in terms of value for money, solar thermal, not so keen. Solar PV generates electricity,
Mm-hmm.
and it is more beneficial, and it will save you money. So it should be helping to reduce your bill by generating electricity from the
I
sun.
can understand that, but you're talking about sustainability for all.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously wind and solar, they don't produce as much carbon as everything else that you've been talking about. So why isn't it being pushed? You know, that wind and solar panels
So
be more.
on a bigger scale, wind is a huge thing for the UK at the moment. So they're talking about bringing a lot more wind farms on the land. So they were looking at doing it on the coast region. So I'm sure on the Norfolk coast you'll see wind farms that help to support electricity. Less so in terms of individual properties or district properties. I'm not that familiar with that being too popular for domestic properties. But solar panels is sometimes one of the only ways, one of the only limited ways that will support the improvement in energy efficiency of homes.
A follow-up question. Talking about residents who have solar PV on the roof, is there a box within the residence showing how much is being generated? Or is that not for the resident, but for Broadland? In other words, Broadland are benefiting from the PV.
So in terms of individual homes, when we install the solar panels, the residents will directly benefit from the electricity that has been generated because it's generated directly to the electric that is generated to that home.
So there should be a box within the property that shows what's generated.
There will be a meter reading,
Yes.
to determine how much energy has been used as a result of that solar panel.
Yeah, I've got orange light.
Ours are in the cupboard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going back a long time, there used to be this thing called feed-in tariff, which was government funded. So where we've installed communal solar panels, there's a double purpose there. So one, it will help to reduce communal electricity to that particular scheme, and this is the case at Brennan Bank. It will help to reduce the communal electricity to that scheme, so that's a benefit to the residents of the scheme. But there was also a feed-in tariff, which also benefits Broadland housing by the government-backed tariffs by providing and installing those solar panels. So those funds are generally ring fenced to then help to support future renewable energy retrofits. So it's a kind of win-win scenario. Unfortunately, they got very popular, that tariff, and the government decided no more, no longer, and disbanded that scheme. Okay, so we talked about roadmap earlier on. The new policy is coming, the sustainability policy. We talked about the 3 different strands within the policy. What I would say also, at this point, which I probably should have said on the last slide, is funding is really an important element of what we're trying to achieve, and funding is quite limited. So the last big phase of funding, the deadline was in November. We hope to hear, and if we're successful, we'll know later this month. And that was we put a bid in, a joint consortium bid with our independent East members. And the funding is not like it used to be, whereby you get 100% of funding. The funding now is that if you want to install external wall insulation, they'll probably price match it and give you 50% towards it. And depending on what the measure is, it reduced, but external wall insulation you get the most funding for. And it's a very tedious application process that you have to go through. You're advised to submit an application as a consortium, so it's good that we have independent East members to be able to quite naturally join up with to carry out that exercise. But it's just genuinely challenging. We don't know if there's going to be a wave 3 or a wave 4. We were excluded from wave 1, which was for local authorities, the funding for local authorities, but we could ask local authorities if we could be joined up or form part of that bid, and that's not an easy task by no stretch of the imagination. So yeah, the funding is quite limited, and unfortunately we're a victim of our own success in certain instances, because a lot of our properties, we don't have many E's or F's. The funding is primarily going to those landlords who still have a lot of poorly performing properties, and that's where a lot of the funding is. So it's difficult on a number of fronts. So decarbonisation strategy review through to zero carbon ready homes, weaning our way off of fossil fuels, oil, coal. Don't have too many oil, don't have any coal that I'm aware of anyway. Very few oil placements, and then I'm sure there'll be a big focus on gas, and that will be one of the big challenges for us, bearing in mind how many properties benefit from gas, and still gas as it currently stands being one of the most affordable forms of heating. So somebody, Joan, I think it was you, mentioned air source heat pumps. My nervousness with air source heat pumps on a retrofit, so if you're changed, we probably wouldn't change from gas to air source heat pumps as it currently stands. But one of the challenges is if you move away from storage heaters to air source heat pumps, 1, it costs an absolute fortune. 2, there's less controls because the air source heat pump system normally runs constantly. So again, depending on your lifestyle and habits, it might cost more. But when you're running electricity on daytime tariffs, that costs a lot of money. So what we try to do now is when we install air source heat pumps, we supplement that with the solar panels to try and keep the costs down and keep it affordable. And then moving on to our journey, 2050 is the stopgap, whereby all of our homes we would like to be, and that's an average. So we're working towards EPC level C, trying to get all of our homes to that as a standard. The EPC target for 2050 is getting an average across the board of a B. And what effectively what that will mean for us is that will be where we're considered as net zero carbon emissions as an organisation. So there's a lot of work to do to get there still. We're still probably in our infancy, and I would imagine a lot will happen between now and that date. But at the moment, the core considerations is we're in 2023 already, so it's scary how quickly time is going. but we're looking at the 2030 targets to be able to deliver that. But there are a lot of moving obstacles that have to move along with us to be able to deliver.
Do you think legislatures will change the dates?
I don't know. I don't know if they will change the dates or not, and anything can happen. Anything, it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen. What we do know is that the noises that come out of every conference of parties events is that we should be doing more.
Yes.
So that's the message, we should be doing more. Financially, do we have the investment to do more is another question. That money has to come from somewhere to be able to deliver.
Basically, the government aren't coming across.
Without getting political,
Yeah.
the government from one
They're
perspective.
telling us all to do
Yeah.
these things. I
Yeah.
mean, 90% of people I know are very into it, but it seems that the government isn't. You know, it's saying that you can do these things, but funding isn't there. You know, if they want a carbonised world, why aren't they doing more?
Yeah, and it
I know, I'm just saying.
is a difficult balance,
You know,
and what I would
it is
say,
a difficult thing to,
yeah,
and education. I mean, I've got solar panels. I don't know how they work. I wasn't explained to, you know, if I knew what I was looking at, then perhaps I could save more money,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
It's just little things like that. I just, you know, you say about funding, it all comes down to the bigwigs that want all this to happen.
I would say the government are committed. The government are committed, and in the defence of the government, I'd say that the world we live in at the moment, there are so many different things that are happening. And I think the priorities are a challenge. And if you just, you've got to do a switch on the news, and you can hear about all of the.
Yeah, but can you imagine what it'd be like if we didn't have housing associations?
Yeah.
We'd all be in mud houses, wouldn't we? Build your own.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm expecting to see a wind farm next time I come and see you two.
Yeah. But, and this is the good thing is I know that there's only a few people in the room today, or online, but actually there's people who care, and we're generating the discussions, and we're here.
You know, I've got
You know,
grandchildren
which is great.
and children
Absolutely.
and that, and they've got to live in the future.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it scares me to death what their lives are going to be like in the future.
Totally
You know,
agree.
and it doesn't seem like there's enough being done. There's so many things that can be done, but can't be done because of funding,
Yeah.
you know?
I mean, the youngsters nowadays haven't got a chance.
No,
I am saving up for my grandkids to get a deposit.
you know, it's a scary thing. And
I think the government have done a lot of work on the new build stuff, even though they moved the target. All the developers know we were supposed to be carbon neutral by 2016. That was when it was finally got moved.
Yeah.
So that was a major dent, I think, in the new homes going that way. Building regulations we have to build to have been tightened all the time, and we have now got a map of routes through now for new build. I think the government have found that easier to deal with, and I think slowly but surely behind the scenes there are an awful lot of the larger house builders which really need to come to the party, actually starting to do things. There's things going on. They have the knowledge. It's just when they release it all. That's what it is. The knowledge is all there to do it. The existing houses, I think, is too difficult for people. I think that's been the issue for government, is actually working out what you do, because it is a huge amount of money to be able to do it. And we've got such a range of housing stock through the UK. You can see that just in this room where you live. You know, you've got a huge range of housing stock, and you've got different interventions for everything. And that is very complicated. And actually we need that complexity to simplify before people will get on board and do it. For an asset manager, you know, for guys in your team as well, guys and girls in your team, that's a skill base that people need to learn again. You know, that's a really different skill base that portfolio managers, as they're called for large portfolios of housing or commercial buildings, have got to learn. And there's only so many consultants who are very expensive at the moment in this field, funnily enough, that are out there doing the work. So it will come, but it is the more difficult thing. We can all agree, I think, it's a very, very difficult thing. But slowly but surely it's coming. I think a lot of people are very worried about spending a lot of money now, new technology coming, you've spent it, and you might have to refit something before 2050 or 2030, whatever it is. And that worry in there is stopping some of that as well. I think,
Well, we've noticed that in the past, haven't we?
We have. We have. So that decision making is sort of slowing the process down, which is not particularly helpful, but human beings are human beings, and you get that's certainly in the system. So
I think they've dealt with their fellow human beings.
There's a current building standard for triple glazed windows.
There isn't a standard. There is a passive house specification triple glazed window.
Not for a passive house, but I mean, if
But that's where it's
building.
come. That's where it's come from,
Yes.
James. So that's what's driven that really, is that standard. But there's there isn't. Yeah.
Are you fitting triple glazed?
Someone's got
We
their
have
hand
just,
up.
Sean, I've just answered James. We're not at the moment, but we're just about to on a scheme we've just built, and we've just had one made in Norwich. So that's on the supply chain using Drayton Windows here in Norwich.
Good.
So all that is going on behind the scenes.
No, that's good. It's just good to
it's
hear.
good. Sean, you've got a question or an answer?
I have, well, not an answer. I don't think anyone's got the answers. I think that the bit that I've gleaned from many of the reports that have been written is that choosing the partners who you can work with here, particularly the product manufacturers, and developing some sort of experimental relationships are going to be key. So I suppose my question is, given the enormity of the challenge and the fact that no one organisation can deal with this, I think, on their own, are there natural product partners who we could partner with and experiment with that sort of, how would I put it, minimises some of the risks of failed implementation, maybe gives some sort of price differential? I mean, could Broadland be an experimental zone? Because that's the reality. I think most of these technologies are going to be experiments.
Yeah, I guess the key is finding the right partners to be able to deliver, and without making excuses, sometimes even that is a challenge, and that's why I say finding the right partner. We have had very good relationships in the past with Mitsubishi's in regards to one of our favoured air source heat pump manufacturers, until such a time as just recently that being able to source the parts, they just weren't able to manufacture them. So there's a big backlog of air source heat pumps, having a big impact in terms of our installation program. And you know, you wouldn't have thought that, but these are external influences that are at play that do have an impact in what you're trying to deliver. And I guess that could potentially happen with a various number of partners, but I think you're right. But it's about finding the right partners to have those relationships and move things forward.
It is, and I think, Justin, look, great presentation. Thank you much, really informative. But it strikes me as if there's a sort of role here for Broadland as a sort of influencer with those partners, but also a big role that you picked up in terms of education. I think we could all learn a lot. I've just installed a smart meter. I'm learning exactly how much it's spending this house, and it's unbelievable. And I do think that that there's a level of education that is available here, which Broadland shouldn't be shy to be passing on, I think.
There is a great deal of work going on through various organisations towards educating residents about retrofit and net zero. One professional made a comment that the simplest way to teach people about climate change is to put them in a garage, close the door and let the engine run for 15 minutes. Then they would all understand about climate change and net zero. But that's just being funny. But no, I mean, Place Shapers, TPAS, Northern Housing Consortium are working hard to try and develop a booklet in layman's language that covers all of these topics, so that residents can have that up front before anything starts.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, James, because with the funding applications also, they want to know exactly how you're going to take the end users through that journey before you started, through post-completion, to make sure you get the benefits of the proposed installation. This is my final slide. I'm not proposing to go through this slide because, conscious of time and any other additional questions that anybody would want to ask, this slide is effectively open just as to generate some debate in terms of, it's more of a risk appetite from very cautious as an organisation to being very adventurous, and some of the questions that we need to understand as an organisation to feed into our sustainability policies. So for an example, I'd pick on the last one because I know James is very interested in it. Electronic vehicles, for example. So these are additional things. So we're still working on what we're going to do with existing homes, new builds and so forth. But it's not just about existing homes, it's about
We'll have
also
another meeting next year.
the infrastructure, about the infrastructure for the new homes and the existing homes as well. So again, it just goes to show that there is a lot to be considered when talking about this decarbonisation journey.
When the new lease plan for Broadland vehicles ends, I was told that you would be replacing them with electric, and that means that you're going to have charge points across Norfolk for those vans. So that's going to bring that into focus quite quickly, so that when operatives are out and about, they can charge their vehicles, because they may not have a charging point at home.
Yeah.
And you've then got to look at service delivery. You've got a whole other load of operational issues going on with just doing that,
I know.
which we're very aware of. But you know, it is amazing when you make that decision and you think, you know, I can imagine there's loads of people around the country going, "We're going electric vans," but the knock-on behind that decision is huge.
I think it's York City Council purchased a fleet of electric vehicles.
Yeah.
They're sitting in a car park and have been for about 5 months because they don't have the infrastructure in place.
I promise you, we're not going to do that.
No, I would expect nothing less.
But it's an example of when you jump on the bandwagon, you need to make sure you've done that risk mitigation and understand, you know, all the impacts of that risk and do it at the right time.
So, okay, we haven't done the existing stuff, but on the new build schemes, every new build scheme that's being done has got infrastructure in, even though you can't see it, to actually put charging points in the future. So we're even if we haven't got the box and the bit there, it's going to be certainly in there. So
we talked about this about 18 months ago.
We did, yeah, we're doing it. You know, we're just about to finish Hockham in a couple of months, Great Hockham, and that's got it sitting there, little box on the ground, ready to go when we've made that decision. So that's what we can do in the short term, is make sure that thinking is and that decision making is not doesn't mean we have to dig up the road and spend a fortune in the future.
Can I just ask you, when you see all these new houses being built everywhere, they're all traditional building.
Yeah.
Why are we not seeing a lot of these modular homes that are built in these factories already and they just get put up? Is it not quicker? Is it not more efficient? Or?
It's a really good question. I've got two of my BSB board members on the line as well, actually. I think that Steve has been in that market, and certainly Sean knows a bit about it as well. We've done modular within Broadland. We've done 2 schemes now. My first foray into modular was in 2013. That was an interesting foray and a big learning curve on how to procure modular and how to do that and that. And we moved away from it because of that at the time. There was various issues with that process. We've just done one recently at Webster Court, housing and care scheme in Norwich. It went very well as an end solution. It took 18 months to come out of the factory. So we had the groundworks done 4 months before the actual buildings actually got here. The procurement process was interesting again. I'm not sure it was a great solution in terms of delivery, because we didn't have 30 white vans sitting there for months on end, cluttering up the residential area. We had a crane, a lorry, yes, 3 days of people, us getting in the way of life. The 3 days we were out of there. So that's very, very good. But the cost of actually putting a modular housing development up is just so extreme still that it's not viable for us to do. So, and that's been one of the problems, that the market is just not doing it. I think it's a solution for particular schemes, but it won't be a solution probably for us for everything. There'll be particular schemes. But we are using timber frame now again. We've gone back to timber frame. We're not using bricks and block as a traditional form, and that gets the embodied carbon down that we've been talking about, and all sorts of things. Steve, you've got a...
I was just going to support exactly what you've said, having worked in the industry, worked for a modular housing company. Cost is the biggest prohibitor, and I think that's the biggest problem. It's more, we'd rather deliver more properties than modular, is probably one way of looking at it. But I think as you said, that the problem is it's still a very new technology, developing technology, and there's so many potential problems if it's not done correctly. I think it's one of those that let's wait until it's developed, it's got a bit more mature, and we've got confidence in what we're buying, really.
I was quite surprised, Steve, because when we were looking, it was the first lockdown when we started to look at modular. I was doing it from my kitchen at home, and I was very surprised about how there is a lot of investment gone in, big factories, Legal and General, those sort of people who have built, but there's an awful lot of small companies. And I was very, very surprised from 2013 to 2023, nothing had moved on. No. Nothing had moved on with the sector. And I was talking to people that I'm sure were operating out of a shed rather than just my kitchen and not anywhere else. And that's a big problem, having that trust, because you're paying for something up front in essence, and it's being built in the factory. There was all sorts of financial and commercial arrangements there that you've got to trust that supplier as well. So as Steve says, there's a lot of I think we will wait and watch and just see how our timber frame goes for a while.
I was running late for a meeting from here to Carrow Road. This is my modular build story, and I was really running late, and I was really worried about being late for this meeting. And I got close to Carrow Road, and suddenly there are all these police motorcyclists and everything, and everyone is told to stop. And I'm like, oh, and everyone was like literally putting their handbrakes on. And I was like, oh, so I made a phone call and said, I'm going to be late for the meeting. It was to Catherine at the time. I'm really sorry, I'm going to be late for the meeting. She's like, why, what's wrong? And I was like, there's all these lorries with all these big things on. And she's like, you can blame Andrew Savage. I must have been the only person that she didn't know the modular build was on its way. And I had to sit there and wait for it. And I just, whenever he tells that story, I think, oh, that day, I just could not get from here to Carrow Road because it was being delivered.
I think we've tried just about everything now since 2004, since I've been here. There is a range of stuff in the stock now that we've probably, as Sean says, for existing build, but for new build, we've probably done all our research really over the years, and we've come back to where we are feeling comfortable with at the moment. And we've done passive, we've done everything now in various construction techniques. So I think we're comfortable. New build's easier though. It's easier than this existing stock. Much easier.
It's strange when we talk about modular, because the European market, mainland European market, modular is very popular.
Yeah, indeed.
And it's very, price-wise, it's very competitive.
Yeah.
To a bricks and mortar property. But you have the benefit, I think in Germany, they have very large manufacturers who manufacture to the millimetre. So there's very little issue.
That's like going back to the prefabs in my day.
In essence, that's what it is. In essence, it's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Sean, you had a point, I think.
No, I think just to really build on the conversation at Steve's point, I think McKinsey's report on this is quite interesting because it goes through all of the the things that you've discussed, but broadly the end summary is those who are going to be at the innovation end will be unsuccessful, lose lots of money and take far too many risks. But those who will be the most successful will be the people who are the fastest followers. And you know, it makes you, it almost sets yourself up to a point that says, you know, you really need to have now a sort of strong sort of strategic analysis, understanding of what's going on in the market, and be a fast follower. I think that was the conclusion, rather than, how would I put it, being at the bleeding edge of innovation. I think that's an acknowledgement of the fact that even in modular and everything else, that actually there's such a long way to go in this experiment, and don't be in it too early, I think, is pretty much the conclusion.
Yeah, completely second that, probably third it. Do we have any other questions? Any thoughts?
No, just keep on doing what you're doing, darling.
Yeah.
You've been called darling now.
Justin, you spoke about working with partners. That includes suppliers and contractors. How are you going to ensure that those suppliers and contractors are meeting the commitment of Broadland housing towards net zero?
I think there's a lot of pressure being put on all suppliers, providers, contractors to go down the decarbonisation route. I mean, one of the factors that is built into now to our procurement process is decarbonisation, sort of sustainability credentials. So I think what will happen is it will filter through that you will just naturally end up with suppliers or contractors who have to meet their obligations to actually to enable them to be able to work with you. So I'm not saying it's there at the moment, but it will be one of the measures. When we're measured for shift, for example, in terms of our accreditations, they are interested in terms of what we're doing, how we're working with our partners. One of the areas that they specifically look into is the contractors and how we work with the contractors. And it's quite difficult to provide the information because you're chasing up these contractors to be able to deliver in it. It's not easy always to provide, but it's one of the measures that's being asked and requested all the time.
Procurement process. I was at Unlock Net Zero in London, and part of the procurement process was discussed that housing associations have a good procurement policy forms part of any contract that the housing association makes with a supplier. So they get supplied a copy, they have to submit with their estimate the details of their own decarbonisation agenda, and then you have it in black and white.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we do need to be mindful of is challenge. We all want to achieve the same things, but we also just need to be mindful of cost as well. And again, it's about getting that balance right. So what we wouldn't want to do is price ourselves out of the market by requesting that a supplier has to meet these standards, and what ultimately it does is reduce the volume of works we can do because the costs are too high. So we have to look at it in terms of a balanced value from a balanced value for money perspective.
I think that procurement piece is a really interesting piece, James, as well, because procurement is a very, very straightforward process. Very straightforward process, and actually I think it will eventually it's going to have to be turned on its head, some of this, the way that we procure goods, services and contractors. So I think that will come out in the wash, and I've been talking to the procurement team a little bit about, a lot of the time we do supply and fit sort of stuff. Well, we don't know what necessarily are we specifying the right supply, and actually do we have to get down to actually our own specifications, and then we have to fit it. Does that make sense?
No,
so
I mean, this
and does procurement allow us to do that in that way? So I think in the future, I think that procurement piece is an interesting piece that needs to work.
And on Justin's comment about price, one of the asset managers talked about you've got 10 possible suppliers who meet the standards, and the one that has the best standard and the best price wins. So that's your balance, if you like.
Yeah, although it's the 5 E's.
So just touching on our procurement process at the moment, we don't just consider price. It's not as black and white in that. We call it the 5 E's procurement process. One of those E's is environmental. So with every procurement activity we're undertaking now, we're considering those type of credentials that you've just spoken about, and the degree to which we consider them is set out in every procurement and tender exercise as well. So it's absolutely becoming more of a focus in our procurement process.
Agreed. Okay, do we have any? We've just gone 7, so we did say an hour, so we've done pretty good actually, but just going on just past 7. I'm going to do this separately. On screen, are there any other questions?